Step back in time and witness the faces of iconic revolutionary figures brought to life through AI colorization. From the American Revolution to the French, Haitian, and Russian uprisings, rediscover the stories of those who shaped history. This is Thomas Larkin, a man whose hands were stained not by the blood of others, but by a crime of survival. Caught in a desperate robbery to feed his starving family, Thomas was sentenced to hard labor at Wandsworth. His face, captured by the prison photographer, shows a man who wore the weight of both his guilt and his humanity. Behind the hardened eyes, there was a man who simply wanted to live and provide. He died in prison, forgotten by all but the records of those who judged him. This is Charles Hawkins, a man whose face showed no fear, even when he was condemned to death for a crime he claimed he didn't commit. He spent years in Portland prison, never once breaking under the pressure, even as the gallows loomed closer. His photo, taken just days before his execution, shows a man who had made peace with his fate. Was he innocent? History never decided. But Charles carried his dignity all the way to the end. And in his final moments, he asked only for his story to be remembered, not for the crime, but for the man he had been. This is Eliza Walker, a woman whose crime was the theft of a loaf of bread to feed her starving children. Sent to Durham prison, she was subjected to the harshest conditions. Her photo, captured in the grim light of the prison yard, shows the deep lines of sorrow etched into her face. Eliza never saw freedom again. She died in prison, not as a thief, but as a mother who was willing to do anything to protect her children. Her crime was never her own, it was a crime of circumstance. And in the cold, dark cell she lived, she was forgotten. This is Thomas Morrow, a man whose crime was petty theft, but whose punishment was not petty at all. Sentenced to hard labor at Wakefield Prison, Thomas worked long hours under cruel conditions. His photograph shows a man worn by years of suffering, but his eyes still burned with the desire for freedom. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a product of a broken system, one that punished him for struggling to survive. Thomas Morrow died in prison, never given the chance to live a life of his own. This is James O'Reilly, a man whose crime was speaking out in a time when silence was safer. Arrested during the Irish Rebellion of 1848, James was charged with seditious speech and agitation against the crown. His face, captured in a simple mugshot, tells the tale of a prisoner who never bent his spirit. Despite years in solitary confinement, James died in prison, but not before becoming a symbol of resistance, a voice that echoed long after he was gone. This is Mary Ann Nichols, a woman whose life was marked by hardship and poverty. Arrested for the crime of prostitution, she was a victim of a society that offered little refuge to its most vulnerable. She spent time in Newgate Prison, but it was on the cold streets of London where she met a fate far crueler than any behind bars. Her story, captured in a stark photograph, speaks of a woman who was invisible in life but will forever be remembered in death. This is William Davies, a laborer, a father, and a man whose desperation led him down a dark path. Arrested for attempting to steal a loaf of bread to feed his starving children, he was thrown into Cardiff Gaol. His photo reveals the weariness of a man who lived in constant fear, his hands marked by years of hard work and hardship. But despite his crime, his death in prison was not the end of his story. It was a warning of the inequality that ran deep in a society that saw poverty as a crime in itself. This is Caroline Carey Sullivan, a woman whose mental health issues were misunderstood by society. Diagnosed with what was then called hysteria, Carey was imprisoned in Broadmoor for crimes she didn't commit. Her face, captured behind the prison bars, shows a woman whose mind was locked in a battle no one cared to understand. She was not a criminal, she was a woman fighting for her sanity in a world that refused to listen. Her story is one of tragedy, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest crimes are those society imposes on its most vulnerable. This is Anne Morris, a woman whose crime was born of circumstance. arrested for being involved in a violent protest, and was sentenced to Millbank Prison, where she endured years of hardship. Her face, captured in a stark photograph, shows the quiet strength of a woman who had been left behind by a system that didn't care for her or her cause. But Anne's story is not one of despair. It is one of defiance. She died in prison, but her name still echoes through the halls of history, a testament to the forgotten voices that once stood up for change. This is Julia Johnson, a young woman whose crime was one of desperation. Caught for assault in a world where women had few options, Julia was sent to Brixton Prison to serve her time. Her photograph reveals a woman with an inner strength, worn down by the prison's oppression but still standing tall. Her eyes tell a story of a woman who fought not just against the law, but against a society that saw her as nothing more than a criminal, not a person. Julia died in prison, leaving behind a name etched in the records of forgotten women. This is Sarah Jane Morris, convicted of stealing bread for her younger siblings during a winter that never seemed to end. She stood before the magistrate with bare shoes and a defiant stare. Sentenced to 3 months hard labor, she never wept. This photo was taken moments before she was sent away. She was not a danger to society. She was hungry. And in the end, she paid a price only the poor would understand. Her crime wasn't theft, it was survival.